And thank you all for joining us today. I think we're at first of all, I commend everyone for this sort of breaking down the silos between the commercial development community and MPO and planning communities. I think that's tremendous. And we're at a point in time where, as I spoke to this morning, sort of the art has been reintroduced into, or the magic, if you want to call it, development. You know, it's no longer 13 acres, and I've got a couple pads for, for a Walgreens and for a Chili's. I got some inline and parking, and I'm just going to do the same darn thing, and it doesn't matter if it's Des Moines or outside Atlanta or in the Northeast or whatnot. So that is a real opportunity for us, and it's also a challenge. I assume that many in this room are familiar with Jane Jacobs, the godmother of, in many ways, what we all espouse today. I happen to be a very active member in the Urban Land Institute. To tell you how these worlds are colliding, to use a Seinfeldian term, I'm part of a program, and that is our Bible. We had one book to read for Urban Land Institute. This is, the financial world, this is large-scale institutional developers, but there's an understanding that place and place-making is very important to this. Let's see, we on the wrong... Thank you, Gunnar. I got a couple more minutes, so you're good to go. So what it really comes down to is change is an opportunity to do things better. And I think what we want to do is value the complexities that have now approached us. And in order to do that, we have to take an integrated approach. We're all familiar with P3, public-private partnership. I think too often the community is left out of that. I call it a P3 plus C. But regardless of what we want as a municipality, as a planning organization, we have to be bound by market realities. We can't change the market, but what we can do is use policies to guide that market to what we want. It's under, hold on one second.
Is this the right one? Is this?
Not here, that will just.
This is you, right? I got you, go ahead.
There we go. So once again, we're bound by the market, and I think that's something that is an opportunity for us to utilize policies in order to drive those outcomes that we want to see. So I was fortunate enough this past week to be up in Toronto moderating a panel at the IEDC, International Economic Development Conference. And place-based economic development has really started to become a thing, as tax incentives and the like are still certainly very important, a business-friendly climate, but if you can't attract talent, and a certain segment, it might only be 10 or 12% of the workforce, but that segment of the knowledge workforce is driving corporate relocation decisions. And what they want are great places, walkability, mobility, doesn't necessarily have to be transit, but mobility and connectivity. And this is sort of a little play off of Brookings' work in terms of the innovation ecosystem. And that's where you want to be. It's combining the economic assets, your institutions, your schools, your historic companies, networking and connectivity, both in the IT sense and in the people sense, and place and environment. And this was the big word of last week, Amazon. 50,000 employees, everyone's talking about this. Well, a couple things. First, if 50,000 employees go to one spot, that leaves a lot of losers, right? That's not the takeaway that we had. First, there might not be one winner. There might be one winner and many secondary prizes, but if you haven't read the RFP from Amazon, it's only 12 pages, do it. Because they have provided us a blueprint for what these companies want, whether you're looking to attract 50,000, which is a city unto itself, 5,000, which is a typical world headquarters, 500, 50, or if you're looking to incubate a bunch of 5-person companies that become the 25, 50, and 500-person companies in the future. That's our opportunity. So let's take a quick historical lesson, because we used to have this sort of environment wherever we were. We lived in villages. The workforce, the leadership, the strategic thinkers, the implementers, they were all there. You had everything, right? It was the center of life, of culture, and of commerce. And for obvious reasons, as the Industrial Revolution came by, there was a need to segregate and remove certain uses for obvious reasons. Well, we took that a little bit to the extreme. And there's nothing wrong with suburbia. I grew up in Long Island. Shocker, I know, I'm a New York boy, down in Dallas now. And there's nothing wrong with suburbia, but it comes back to balance. And I think what we started to see in the 80s and the early 90s, we started to reach the physical limits of how we could connect and work well together just by driving. But that's okay. Magic came along. We've got the internet. Now, I don't need to be in downtown LA. I could be in San Bernardino, or I could be in my t-shirt and boxer shorts, and we're all good to go, right? Well, not long after that started to happen, we started to return to our roots. Who remembers Friends, obviously, from the television show? And I've always looked at television as the ideal of where we want to be in society. When I grew up, that means I was watching Chips and I was watching the Brady Bunch, and it was a suburban ideal. But as I started to come of age into the workforce in the 90s, all of a sudden it was Friends, it was Chicago, it was ER, which was Chicago, and urban living in a large center started to become attractive again. But that was just the beginning. Since then, it has grown, and it has moved to urban suburban locations, to first, second, third ring suburbs, to smaller cities and communities, which are really starting to provide a tremendous amount of value today. And these are just some of the projects that I've worked on and some of my partners, and they represent everything except the city core. There's State Farm, which is the lower of the triad, which is about 12 miles north of downtown Dallas and Richardson, 190 fallow acres. Without a form-based code that tied into a transportation network that further tied in to a TIF plan and public and private sector value capture to pay for that infrastructure, you layer all these on top of one another. Now you have an implementable approach to take a green field with tremendous assets around it and be able to monetize the type of investments to make that type of place. Next thing you know, KDC came along, State Farm, 5,000 employees for their regional headquarters, and they are about 3 to 4 million of 6 million square feet. This was nothing as of 3 years ago. So these things can happen quick. Some of these others, Roanoke, I'll talk a little bit about, McKinney, downtowns outside of Texas, and a first-ring suburb of New York in New Rochelle. So this is a horses for courses, but it all comes down to the commonality of great walkable places, and form-based codes are a tremendous tool by which to get there. So there's a lot of data to this, and those who aren't familiar with Smart Growth America's work on the subject, businesses are moving downtown. I've heard anecdotally that is happening here, and a tremendous resurgence in downtown Des Moines, but also in these more, and when I say urban, urban can be a Main Street, urban can be the West Village in New York and everything in between. These more urban, vibrant, walkable settings. So the market wants this walkable mixed use, and form-based codes are a tool. And a tool is just as good as it is written, it's just as good as it is implemented, but in my opinion, as a developer, it provides the opportunity to align the market with your desires as a region, with local placemaking and community desires, and provides me the flexibility which increases my upside and reduces my risk. That's tremendous. And I know that there is some fear in the community, because whenever there's change, there's fear, especially when we've done something one way for 30, 40, 60 years. But I can tell you, and I'll be happy to speak to some of the landowners or developers, if I see a form-based code, the best thing for me personally is to see a form-based code that is about to be implemented, because I know that the price value has not yet jumped. There has not yet been that recognition, because a form-based code, simply put, adds value to properties, adds values to business concerns. So that's my perspective as a developer. Spent about 15 years on the actual development side, also on advisory services. But it's flexible, allows developers to adapt and to evolve. What might be flex space today could be residential tomorrow, but as long as the building is facing the street, as long as there is street activity when I am walking down and I feel like I am in an urban node, I am in a walkable setting, where it's a small town or a big city, again, horses for courses, that's a great tool and great knowledge for me as a developer. It's a streamlined and consistent approval process, as you heard just prior by Leslie. I think that was very well explained. And again, it keeps coming back to, there's a market, you're not going to change it. You can turn your back and say, we won't change, the market will go somewhere else. Or you can adjust your policies, align that so that you can get the outcomes of economic development, of environmental sensitivity and responsibility, of community building, whatever they might be. So a couple case studies. Owensboro, Kentucky, 1988. This was not a dying downtown. This was a dead downtown. There was nothing. But they had a key asset. They had a waterfront. So they thought, in the way we often think, we'll make a nice park, we'll do some sculptures, it's going to turn around the city. Well, my business partner went in, I wasn't involved in this project, and he said, you realize you're just going to create a huge, very expensive, difficult to maintain, dead, indefensible space. You're going to detract more value than you're going to actually add. Now, that doesn't mean that the waterfront is not an amenity, but if we're talking about place and we're talking about walkable urbanism, then it has to be activated. So through a comprehensive effort of a form-based code that then showed the benefits to both the public and private sector to invest, and there are investments on both sides, walkable infrastructure, reworking the roadways, working with the business community, the landowners, millions, hundreds of millions in public and private investment. And about a year and a half ago, that all culminated when Emmett Smith's site relocation company had almost 1,000 employees locate to Owensboro, Kentucky. Owensboro, Kentucky. And this was based on place. Downtown Rogers, Arkansas. Hardly a huge metropolitan, center, but it's absolutely a vibrant center of culture and commerce. And like any area, there is not one fit description for even a downtown. You have to look at your districts. You have to look at that authentic driver of what makes a place and the locations within that place special. And don't think that you just put out a code, have a couple meetings, and then snap your fingers and it works. You got to pull up your sleeves, pull up the bootstraps. You have to engage the community, engage the business community, foster entrepreneurship. Form-based code provides that framework. It provides that flexibility, but that doesn't mean you don't have to actively work to promote that activation, which in turn drives entrepreneurship, increased property values, new restaurants, an entrepreneurial environment. Roanoke, Texas, I mentioned this a little bit before. Again, not a dying downtown. This place was dead, but had one key asset, Babe's. Best fried chicken, by the way, my opinion, in the country, certainly in Dallas. We can debate. But as you can see, this was tumbleweeds. So what we did is we recognized that there was history here. It didn't look like much. In fact, at first the city wanted to basically tear down the delinquent and dilapidated buildings, but there were opportunities there to bridge the historic past to a new future. So you go through some of the traditional planning efforts, you look at your districts and your history, always tie it to the market. Do not hope and pray, and this is what we want to see. What will the market today support? And how can you adjust policy to drive additional market support in the future? And again, because of this effort, with a focus on economics and the private sector, along with the public sector and community, $8 million in public funds for walkable infrastructure. The result, you see the top to the bottom. Babe's brings in, $7 to $10 million a year. They have about a half dozen other restaurants that are each doing above 2, some above 4 to 6. They have created an area without much residential, by the way. It's going to come. Usually you have to have residential first. It just was not going to be a driver here. But by creating that type of form and working off the inherent economic traits, now this is a bustling, vibrant place that people go to. And now that you have this tourism sort of hospitality industry as an anchor, what happened next is the Peabody Hotel moved in. Their first location in Texas was in Roanoke, about 50 minutes from Dallas, not much closer to Fort Worth. People would have thought this is the middle of nowhere. But it's a great, vibrant Main Street neighborhood that is now going to have a high-end hotel. It is about to have new offices, Class A. This is an absolute comprehensive economic driver. And then people say, well, form-based code, at the end of the day, isn't it going to be a bit monolithic? It's actually quite the opposite. It provides a tremendous range of building types, of architectural styles. It allows me, if I have an old historic building, and whether it's technically historic or it's just an old warehouse that doesn't have a designation, if I want to go ahead and keep that use, fantastic. If and when, if I'm allowed, because it's not historic, let's say, if and when the economics suggest that there's an opportunity for a rehab or for a redevelopment, that's an additional opportunity that is allowed to me as a developer. And I don't expect you to read this, it's a lot of eyewash, but this was New Rochelle, New York. And at the core, this was an area that had 40-story buildings and where it was appropriate to have a dense, high core. But as you start to then go on out to more residential neighborhoods or more sort of old school downtown mixed use sort of corridors, you can provide opportunities by focusing on form and let the economics of what happens within that envelope happen organically. So here we are. And this is an opportunity focusing on local places, but a series of connected and interconnected local places where Des Moines and the greater region can be at that center spot. And I know you've done a lot of work to get there already. Because successful regions aren't about a place, and it's not about policy, it's about outcomes. It's about finding the unique characteristics of varying communities. What are their drivers? How can you connect them, both through transit and mobility and just a general brand and a sense of community? Walkable neighborhoods and amenities, we all get that. But it also provides a tremendous balance. There is something wonderful about a traditional bedroom community. But when you're waiting in traffic, what was 20 minutes is now 35, and in 10 years it's going to be 45 or 55 minutes. All of a sudden the joys of suburbia aren't really joys anymore. Then we start to pressure our rural outposts, and we start to just eat up land because it's cheap and we can just keep replicating and replicating. The good news is the market no longer wants that. The market does want suburbia, and the millennials are starting to have kids, but it's not going to be the suburbs that I grew up in. It's not their parents' suburbs. They want something that provides that taste of urbanity. Whether it's a 5-minute drive or ideally a 5 or 10-minute walk to a downtown, that's an opportunity, and that's where infrastructure and mobility really come into play. So I'm not going to go too much into this. I'll just go for a few key takeaways, and I'm happy to provide this to anyone that wants. Align the market with outcomes. Form allows you to do that, to get your outcomes, and my outcomes as a developer is a profit motive. I want to do things well. Some developers, it's not that they want to do things poorly, but maybe they don't have a social calling. There's nothing wrong with that. A lot of folks are in business because we're in business and we need to make a living. Try to align that so it has positive outcomes. Streamline the process, not just for me, but also for your staff. That flexibility is not wiggle room. That flexibility allows response to the market and for us to evolve as individuals, as organizations, and as communities. Historic and new buildings add value. What I love about a form-based code is if I have one building and there's a parking lot down the street or next to me, when that gets redeveloped, I have a sense of surety it will be done right. I don't know exactly what they're going to do inside. I may or may not like the modern architecture or the classical architecture, but it's going to address the street. It's going to address the buildings that are adjacent to it. It will add value to me, and likewise my developments will add value to those around me. Flexible, we talked about that. The simple rules to the road, it's flexible, but it's also very fair and very consistent. It accelerates development. This is not something that slows things down, because if you are prescriptive and I'm telling you you have to build this use and this FAR right here, if the market doesn't want it, it's not going to happen. You can't change that. By providing that flexibility, you allow not only acceleration of investment, but multiple nodes of investment. You might have a LIHTC building going up while I have a market rate apartment going up, while you have some office and maybe a mixed use building as well. Finally, it creates the vibrant places we love, because when we love a place, it's our experience with the street, with the buildings and the public space around us, and most important of all of that is only a tool for us to interact and sort of rub elbows. That's what urbanity, whether it's a main street or whether it's a metropolitan area, that's what it is really about. So as sort of a final thought, we're at a really interesting time now, and I keep going back to the market. The first one is indisputable. We are seeing retail absolutely shed. We've got 22, 24 square feet a person of retail in this country. That's twice of, I think, Australia, which is next. You go to the UK, it's like 3. We are well over retail. The retailers are getting this. They are changing their footprints. That's an opportunity. That's an opportunity, A, for a developer who owns that property to say, is this something where perhaps we can work with the city, readjust the road corridor, make it more friendly to allow certain walkable pockets or whatever it might be. And on the bottom, what was the gleaming, shiny jewel, the 1980s Class A office space, again, are they going to move to the city? Is it just going to go dark and become blighted? Or are there redevelopment opportunities? And as a parting thought, because this is such an opportunity for the smaller metropolitan regions and the smaller cities that, to be honest, really are what this country is all about. Really are about that spirit of entrepreneurship and the ability where you can't just walk into Soho anymore and start up a little craftsman business. But boy, you can go into a small town and really become something. And a small town is a good thing, and it is a large driver in this economy, small, medium, and large. And when we're talking about the cost of distance with automation, whether it's automated cars, and in this case really trucks, whether it's the ability to have things that are drop shipped, whether it's the Nordstrom that they opened 2 weeks ago that has no clothes, this is an opportunity for smaller areas, for rural towns and downtowns to all of a sudden have access to the amenities and range of choices that were once only available to the top half dozen, 2 dozen metros. What can that mean for you if you then utilize those economic opportunities, focus on creating great places that can now support a 600 to 2,000 square foot store where it was 20,000 to 200,000 square feet not long ago? smaller cities, rural downtowns. This is a tremendous opportunity, and I really hope that you all take advantage of it. The efforts on the form-based code, I see you all are going in the right direction. I saw the engagement from the real estate community. Please keep those silos talking to one another. They're absolutely dependent on each other, and I really appreciate your time and effort, and happy to answer any questions if we have time. I don't know if we do. Thank you.
We have until 12:30, and I welcome Leslie up here. And if you have questions from the audience, we can take them until we've exhausted them or we run out of time.
Questions? Either we did a really good job or a really bad one. I'm hoping the former. That's what I'm going to say either way. Comments? I mean, how do you feel this sort of pertains? Do you see that this is an opportunity here, that what you're looking to do with the form-based code is a positive? What are some of the struggles that you have, especially with the development community? I happen to be one. I know our trials and tribulations. We are a stubborn group, but at the end of the day, also can be real drivers of innovation. So,
one thought that's crossed my mind looking at the new zoning code and just comments that have come up from clients that we work with and projects that they were planning on, that they're learning of this new code and it's revising what they think they might be able to do with the property. There are a lot of small little properties throughout the Des Moines Metro that maybe somebody planned to do a smaller project there, but it won't support the new form-based code because of, a 3-story building was not what they had planned and that would fit really on that site. I feel like there's maybe some concern that even though this would increase property value over time, that they kind of get bullied out of their lot because there's not really anything they can do with it. So larger developers that might be consuming lots around them might be able to push them out at a lower price point because they don't really have any options anyway.
And so Leslie might be able to speak because it's so place specific, right? I don't want to talk theoretical when for someone it's not theoretical. It's a piece of property, it's their retirement, it's something that they love, it's something that they had plans for. But ideally the flexibility of a code should promote that opportunity whether it's a joint venture opportunity. So for example, I've done work in existing downtowns in the Northeast. And we're talking existing downtowns where we're an institutional player, but there are a lot of little slivers. And some of these slivers have been owned for generations. And because of the new zoning code, you could do something on their land, but they weren't necessarily tooled up for that, right? Because it's a change and it's an evolution. So there are ways where, through joint ventures, where they didn't have the horsepower or the knowledge or the financial resources that we had, where we were able to work with them so that they could keep their land and they're on the deed still at the end of the day. So there are different ways to overcome that from a business perspective. As to the actual calibration of the code and the specificity, I don't know enough to comment. I'd be happy to sort of look at some math, but Leslie might be better if you want to speak with her afterward. It's certainly it's a logical concern. And when you're talking about transformative change, it's never easy. There's no perfect set of rules. But again, it really comes down to the fact that there's a greater good that if you can find those ways to help assist those that may not have the means to take advantage of the new benefits, and a lot of that is, again, perhaps working with the commercial real estate community and finding some of those programs. But they certainly exist. Yes, miss.
In Des Moines, what you've been talking about is a lot about downtown. But in Des Moines, I grew up in Des Moines, and I remember little corridors and areas within neighborhoods where there were businesses.
Yes.
And how do you start, and I know that's something we want to do here. We want to use some of our corridors better, get some of the big boxes out of there. But how do you incent that to be able to get developers to come in or new entrepreneurs?
I don't know if the problem necessarily is the developers or the entrepreneurs, because we're going to follow the market. If it's not there, it's not there, and there, you can, again, try to align and maybe create one, but there are limitations there. But the corner store is just sadly missing. I was fortunate enough where I used to live on Long Island that we still had a vestige of these sort of 4 little shops. And you had a pizza place and you had a little deli, which was also sort of a bodega, and a little bar and whatever. It was sort of like this little neighborhood anchor that a number of us could walk to, and had almost no parking. That would be so illegal to build today on so many levels, and it's a great little asset to this community. So I think the bigger issue I faced is working with communities so that they understand, and again, it's horses for courses. You don't necessarily want a bar in the middle of just a traditional suburban landscape. But to have the opportunity for kids to walk and be able to, get, hopefully not a soda, but a soda or whatever it might be, ride their bikes around, to be able to stop in and get your, as we discussed this morning, your $1.25 cup of coffee instead of your $3.25 cup of coffee, a little gathering place in the community. It goes back to Jane Jacobs. I mean, she talks about this on, her favorite residential blocks almost always had some degree of commerce to them. Now, that's within a big city setting, and how do you right-size that? I'll be honest, we're reaching this pinnacle and this moment of change, and collectively some of these issues we have to figure out because there's no prescriptive answer, and it's so place-based. But what I would suggest is if you can find the opportunity for small-scale business that does not have much overhead, that has an opportunity for a morning, an afternoon, and even a little bit of an evening turn, now you really might have something, and that becomes an anchor and a part of the community and an asset. So I know it's not a direct answer because I think part of it is we're collectively figuring this out, and that's why it's so important that from the regional perspective, from the community perspective, and from the development and the commercial real estate perspective, we all sort of figure this out, because if we're just talking profit, it's not going to work for the community necessarily. And if the community gets everything they want, but you can't build anything, it doesn't work for anyone, right? It all sort of comes together. Hope that at least gives some color. Yes, sir.
I welcome a lot of the market-driven changes that you've talked about, and hope that it means that we're waking up from a long, bad dream. But can you give us any assurance that what we're seeing is not just the latest generational fad that will eventually pass?
So I'm loath to give guarantees, even though I'm a developer. We like to throw them out, right? Who's going to come back in 10 years? But I think what we're seeing is A, an evolution, and B, I always come back to balance. You don't need 50% of the market to want walkable mixed use to have the need for some significant areas of walkable mixed use. If it's 30%, 40% of the market, and you only have 3% of your land that's serving that need, you are underserved. So when we built one way for 60 years, it just went way out of balance. Now, 30 years from now, will we have reached the equilibrium? That's part of the long-term cycles, and maybe. For the foreseeable future, I don't think so. And I know, and I appreciate them, we have debates and the like, but the Joel Kotkins of the world who are saying, well, if the millennials are having kids, they're all rushing to the suburbs, and it's just going to be like it was 30 years ago. It ain't. They do want to go to the suburbs to a degree. More of them would like to stay in the cities. Once they have 3 kids, or the schools, they might say, I just can't do this anymore. But they do not want to be 20 minutes from the strip center, power center, that's 20 minutes from the mall, that's 20 minutes from the cool place. So what you're going to see, again, is it comes down to balance. I take that from the position of when Manhattan, the densest of dense here in this country, realized we need sort of more humanity, whether it's the High Line, and I know there are issues in the equity aspect, but they're focused on public space. They're focused on, saying this is a pedestrian area, but we also need to create an opportunity. When you see the benefits of Central Park and things of that sort, that's a dense urban node recognizing it has to provide a little bit of the other. The suburbs have to do a better job of providing their pockets of urbanity, which, by the way, do a great job of preserving the very nature of the bedroom communities we want. Because if we just keep sprawling, we're just going to choke ourselves out. It doesn't benefit anyone. My 25-minute, 45-minute, now it's an hour drive. What happened to my suburban dream? So I think this is both a cataclysmic change in that we just overbuilt, so we have a lot of catching up over the next decade or two. But I think it is also an evolution, and we'll reach that calibration. And to my point about the opportunity for smaller metropolitan areas and more rural downtowns where just the time cost of distance made things not economically feasible before, now they are. And a lot of folks, you see this actually in New York where, you once were an artist in Soho. I mean, good luck with that, unless you're Bansky. Then you went to Brooklyn, then you went to Queens. Now they're going to upstate New York. They're going 4 or 5 miles outside because that's where they can get their space. But now imagine where the space is still less expensive, but they are connected, and what was 5 hours is now a 2-hour drop by Amazon or whatever it might be. It really changes things so that you don't have to live in the big city to have urban amenities. And I think that's tremendous for our suburbs and our exurbs as much as it is for the big city and for the country. Yes, sir.
Actually, sorry, I just kind of touching on what you just mentioned. Is there a way to actually get that three-bedroom community, like for having kids in the downtowns? Because it seems like that's a market we can't reach.
Yeah.
We can't make it habitable for people to stay downtown.
It's tough. I'm trying to figure it out myself. For one, there's such a dearth of three-bedroom apartments anywhere. In Manhattan, in the smaller downtowns that I've worked in suburbia and the like. Obviously schools are an issue. But at the end of the day, I think it's finding the amenities, and a lot of it comes to infrastructure. If I'm gonna have 3 kids, but I can walk on a safe, wide enough sidewalk with activity, if, going back to Jane Jacobs, we have the eyes on the street and it feels like, you know, if like my kid's 10 years old, 12 years old and wants to run to the corner store, I'm not afraid of it. If I can go ahead and take the stroller, and unlike where I live in Uptown Dallas, which is becoming a great walkable area, but God forbid you're actually texting because you're going to run into a utility pole that's literally right in the middle of a 3-foot sidewalk. If you start to take those things into consideration, I think you have a far better opportunity to retain a number of those. But also remember this, we used to live 60-year lives, if we were lucky. And we got married at 22 or 23. Until about 45 or so, we had the kids in the house, and then we had a 15, maybe 20-year run. Well, that's sort of flipped now. We get married at 30 or 35, we have kids for the 20 years or whatever it is, and then we got 30 more great years ahead of us. So 2/3 of our lives now don't necessarily even need that 3-bedroom apartment, but what you do want to find is the activity there, morning, afternoon, evening, so that those 3-bedroom family folks say, you know what? I'm going to take a no lot line house that is a 5-minute walk from downtown. And what I'm seeing is it's not about the acreage anymore, especially with the younger generation. I got 3 kids, I don't need 4,500 square feet, but I'll take 2,600 square feet and a no lot line, which has some public space and is integrated with good urban form and is adjacent or close to a downtown. I'll take that over, a smaller location or a cottage that has acres and acres, or even the 26 or 3,200 square feet and acres because I'm in the middle of nowhere. So I think it's about the choices and that sort of full spectrum of housing opportunities. It doesn't all have to be in the core, but it has to somehow serve the core, just as the core then serves the suburbs and those inner rings as well. All right. I really thank your time, and if anyone has any questions afterward, or I'll be happy to share the PowerPoint, or if you have any developers that are like, this is crazy, please, I'll be happy to talk to them. I'll not only talk them off a ledge, I'll show them this is really, you all are investing in their future as much as you're investing in your regions. Thank you very much.